Good morning. It is good to see everyone this morning. Want to add my word of welcome to you. Singing's much better than if it was just me. So we are glad that you are here worshiping with us together. If you are a guest with us, we do hope we have opportunity to meet you after, shake your hand, introduce ourselves, and get to know you a little bit. So if you're watching on our live stream, thank you for tuning in. We hope that the opportunity presents itself for you to join us as well. We would love to see you. I do want to echo David just in saying that last night was a wonderful time. Thank you to Charlie and Teresa for pulling that off and putting that all together, and for all of those that helped with that. It was nice to, bless you, it was nice to bring that back after not having that for a number of years. So thank you very much for all the work that went into that. As far as announcements, we do have a couple of things to note. Our evening service tonight, which is normally at 5, is going to be at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So if you show up at 5, you will probably have a great time of fellowship in the parking lot as people are leaving. But we do hope that you're able to be here at 4 to worship with us this evening. And then for youth group and parentals of youth group, as soon as our 4 p.m. service is over, we will head on over to the Blevins for our annual Super Bowl devotional. And pickup is there tonight at 9 o'clock. So if you have questions about that, let me know. But that is the current plan as it is. So that said, this morning is one of our kind of mission-focused sermons leading up to our mission contribution toward the end of March. And as Jim said about a month ago, laying the foundation. That is the theme that was chosen this year for our mission outreach, our mission contribution that will come up in March. Most of you are aware, for anyone who is not, we do one Sunday morning devoted to our mission work. And so all the money given on that day will go towards that. And so this year, the theme that was put forward is laying the foundation. And Jim did such a good job discussing that here about a month ago. And as we look at the different missionaries that we support, and it's this morning is kind of one of those times we get to talk about the fact that Jim is now in Cameroon and doing his mission work there, and Brian is on his way back from India. And we're excited to hear how his trip went when he came back. We'll see if there were any flowers involved. If you were here last time he gave his report, he's a pretty popular guy over there in India. So it'll be interesting to hear. But laying the foundation is one of those things that we all know, we all understand the importance of it. And so the verse that was chosen this year is 1 Corinthians 3, 6 through 11. It's not going to be on your screen. It is in your Bibles. So if you have one of those, you are welcome to look. Don't worry, the rest of the verses will be on there later. Don't rebel. But starting in verse 6, Paul says this: I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to his own labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as an expert builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should be careful how he builds. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. And so we know, those of us, I mean, you're here and not at home in bed for a reason. And that's because you, on some level, understand and believe in the importance of foundation. Understand and believe in the importance of Jesus being that foundation. But I wonder if sometimes this falls under that category of things that we know, but we don't necessarily know. right? Like, there's those things that we fully understand on one level, right? Like, there are certain foods I should not eat because they are not good for me, but I'm going to eat them anyway because I really, really enjoy them. I know I should get a little bit of exercise because that is good for me, but I really don't want to get exercise, so I don't. I know for a fact the Dallas Cowboys are going to let me down, but every year I'm going to believe this is our year, okay? Like, there's those things that we know on a level, and yet we struggle sometimes to really see what that looks like lived out. And I think one of those things is foundation. Because what we know on one level is that foundation matters. We understand whether it is because we live in a home, whether it is because we have had a hand in building one, or whether there's all different ways. When you're a parent, you're like, okay, what kind of foundation can I lay for my kids? If you're a teacher, okay, I have to teach the basics before we can move on to something else. I have to lay the foundation of this subject before we can go on to bigger and better things. And Christianity is very much the same. And as we talk about our missionaries and we talk about what is done, in so many ways, that's what's taking place, is that foundation is being laid. Sometimes our missionaries are in a place where they're just planting the seed and trusting that somebody's going to come along behind them. And sometimes that seed's already been planted and they're doing some watering and hoping that it grows. But whether we're talking about Jim or Brian or our missionaries overseas, whether we're talking about the local outreach that takes place around this building, we're hoping and we're praying that foundation is being laid. We're praying that a firm foundation in God is being put in place. As verse 10 through 13 said, by grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder. Someone else is building on it, but each one should build with care. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Christ Jesus. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. Because the reality is, as we know, what we build our foundation on is going to show. It's going to matter. And we know as Christians, we know as God followers, as lovers of Jesus Christ, that we know that our foundation should be in God. That should be the thing that everything else is built upon. And yet, let's be honest. Life happens. Life gets in the way. And we go through these stretches of time that maybe we justify to ourselves, look, I understand the importance of foundation. I understand that God is the most important. But you just have to understand at this point in my life, like, I have to make work more important. I have to make work more important because I'm trying to make money and I'm trying to take care of my family. God understands. God understands that that's just where I am right now. There's those times that, look, I understand that God is most important, but right now, like, my relationships, that's where my focus needs to be. And God's going to understand that. God knows that's, I'll get back to Him being the foundation, but God knows that this is just the time of life I'm in right now. And as the Scripture says, when God ceases to be the foundation, it shows. It starts to show no matter how well we try to hide it, no matter how well we build our house, no matter how good looking that house is, at some point, that foundation is going to be tested. And so one of the things that is most critical for us is to be honest with ourselves. It's also one of the hardest things for us to do. Are we honest with ourselves as we sit here this morning and we think, is my foundation truly in God? Is the foundation of my life, is that which everything else is built upon, Jesus Christ? When I look at the puzzle that is my life, is God a piece or is God the image when the puzzle is put together? Because we do a really good job of God just being one of those pieces. Well, I'm a husband and I'm a father and I'm at this job and this is my job and I'm a son and these are the people in my life and I'm also a Christian. and God just kind of becomes one piece of the puzzle. But things fall apart if God is not the entire puzzle. And so we need to be willing to have that honest assessment of our life as we sit here and we ask ourselves, okay, am I living my life in such a way that everything else is built upon God and everything else is built upon Jesus? And maybe you're sitting there going, if I'm being honest, no. If I'm being honest, no, that's not the case. It may have been the case at some point. It may have been the case at some time in my life, but I've probably gotten a little bit away from that, and God's not that foundation anymore. The good news is, it doesn't have to stay that way. I could ask for a show of hands. There are probably numerous people in here, there's multiple that I know just personally, that at some point in their life, they walk through their house and they say, wow, that crack wasn't there before. Interesting. And you probably at some point made a phone call and somebody came out and said, well, it's not going to be pretty, but we can fix that foundation. We can make it right. We can put it back to the way it used to be. And so maybe you're living your life and you started to notice those cracks that weren't there before. You started to notice, man, life just doesn't seem to be working the way that it did. Maybe I'm more angry than I used to be. I'm responding differently than I did, and I don't really know why. Life just doesn't seem to be what it once was. And maybe it's time to assess the foundation. Maybe it's time to look and see, is my foundation still as strong as it once was, or have I gotten away from that? And if you have, doesn't have to be the end of the story, but just like at a house, if you ignore a bad foundation, it is just going to get worse. And so I would encourage you, I would challenge you, I would plead with you that as you sit there and you do that honest assessment, that if your foundation is struggling and you know it is, let's work on that together. Let's talk about that. Let's repair that foundation so that the beautiful house that you've built can stand firm and stand strong. It is worded like this in Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. If God is not the one in charge of our house, it doesn't matter what we do to make it appealing. It doesn't matter how pretty of a house we have put. It doesn't matter how many interior designers and decorators and wonderful architects we have hired to build a beautiful structure. If the foundation is not solid, you have problems, even if they don't show yet. And so I pray and I encourage you to make sure that foundation is strong. Jesus, in Matthew 7, worded it like this. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. And I've heard this talked about different ways, and if you go to different commentaries and you look at different things, you'll hear different ideas of exactly what Jesus is talking about. There are those that think that Jesus is simply talking about the day-to-day storms of life. And I think that's true. I think that applies. I think that when life gets rough and things don't go the way we want it to, that our foundation is revealed. Do we feel like things are falling apart because our foundation isn't as strong as it once was? But then there's also those who say, no, Jesus wasn't talking about our day-to-day storms. He wasn't talking about just life is this way sometimes. Jesus is talking about judgment. Jesus is talking about there will come a day when the storm comes and our foundation will be revealed. And we also know that that's true. And one thing that I think we struggle with, one thing that I think would drastically change not just the way that we would live our lives, but the way that we approach looking at our mission work and the way that we approach our interactions with other people is the reality of that final storm that is to come. Because when we see the people at the store, and we see the people that we interact with at work, and we see the people that we bump into when we pass by on the road, that person that cut us off, do we see somebody that's just, well, I'll never see them again? Or do we see them as somebody that will one day stand before Jesus Christ, that will one day stand before God, and their salvation will be determined? Do we have this outpouring of desire to speak into the lives of the people around us so that when that storm comes, not just our house, but their house will stand firm? Because the reality is that's what our mission efforts are about. Our mission efforts are about reaching as many people as we can and helping them build that foundation so that when that day comes and we get to heaven, they're there with us. Don't get me wrong, God absolutely helps us in the day-to-day. If you're struggling, if you're having a hard time, please know, Jesus did not just die for heaven. Jesus died for our day-to-day. Okay, Jesus died so that our day would look different than somebody who doesn't know him. But Jesus also died so that when this life is over, there's a place that awaits us. There's a home that awaits us. And as we look at the work done by our missionaries and the work done here in outreach and all these different places, that's what it's about. It's about, are we doing as much as we can with everything that we have to build as much foundation for as many people as we can? Because the storm is going to come. And I love Jesus' words where he says, whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. Because are we doing our part to make sure that people hear? And it's not just overseas. We intellectually understand that, right? Like, we see pictures of foreign countries and we're like, those poor people who've never heard about Jesus. Which is true. But do we understand just how many people you interact with on a daily basis don't know Jesus either? We kind of have this mindset when it comes to America and it comes to the people that we interact with, and it's like, well, they knew, they just chose. That is not our world anymore, guys. They may have heard something, but I guarantee you there's a lot of people you interact with who have not heard this Jesus, who have not heard the Jesus who loves them, who wants nothing more than to save them. He wants to put people in their lives to build a community and a support system and family and brothers and sisters. That's the Jesus that people need to know and people need to hear. And that's on us. That's on us. Our job is not to just walk around and fling Bibles at people and hit them in the head and go, well, figure it out. No. There's a reason that Jesus came and he taught and he equipped. And when he left, he said, now it is your job to teach and equip. And that's us. He's talking to us. That's our job. Are we doing what we can to teach and equip? Do we take on that responsibility? We don't like that word, right? Like, we don't like responsibility. I don't like the responsibility I've got. I definitely don't want anybody giving me more. But if we look at the world around us as souls that Jesus desperately wants to save, I hope, maybe, just maybe, we no longer look at it as a responsibility, but as a calling, as a mission. God, I pray that when this life is over, I am at peace to know that I've done everything that I can with as many people as I can. I know I can't save them all. But I pray I've done everything that I could. Paul in Romans chapter 10 says, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? We have a world that is in desperate need of hearing about our Jesus. And we need to make sure we're doing our part to make sure they hear. Because when Jesus talks about the houses that are built, they're both building after hearing the word. There's people out there who don't even know they need to build a house, much less where to build it. and they're just going about their business. And so what is it that is our responsibility? In Matthew 14, we read this. When Jesus heard what had happened, speaking of John the Baptist being killed, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. Now, if you ever feel overburdened, all right, I won't make you show your hands so you don't, your family doesn't look at you. But if you've ever at some point in your week, like, well, just give me a moment, peace, please. Please, just, remember Jesus, okay? Jesus is like, this tragic, horrible thing has happened to me, and I know that there's people everywhere. I'm going to go away. I'm going to remove myself from everyone over here so I can have a minute to myself. And all the people are like, oh, we're going over there now. Okay, let's go. Let's follow Jesus. And in that moment, I know how I would feel. I pray that I keep it in my head so my family's not like, well, fine, we'll leave you alone then. And yet, what do we see from Jesus? When Jesus landed and saw the crowd, he had compassion upon them, and he healed their sick. As you read on past that, Jesus feeds them, and he cares for them. And this word compassion, I love every time it comes up in the Gospels, because every time Jesus responds with compassion, that's him seeing a need that is there and him meeting that need. He looks out and he sees them and he sees they're in need of something that I can provide. They're in need of something that I can do. And for us, we need to have Jesus' eyes to the world around us. That out of compassion, we see that need and we do something about it because we're being called to find a need and fill it. And that's going to look differently for different ones of us. Different ones of us have different abilities, different gifts that God has given us. But what God is calling us to do is with compassionate eyes, look at the world around us, see the needs around us, and do everything in our power to fill it, to meet that need. And to not go, well, somebody else will take care of that. Somebody else will do it. You don't have to be the person that stands up on a lunch table with a Bible. You don't have to be the person that, loudly proclaims with a bullhorn out front of work before you go into the office. But we absolutely, no matter what our gifts, can love people, can care about people, can have compassion upon them. Because when we look out and we see someone who is lost and we see somebody who doesn't have that relationship with Jesus Christ, how is that any less than seeing somebody in need of food, seeing somebody in need of something material? How much more important is someone's salvation than their basic day-to-day needs? And so I pray that God grants us those eyes of compassion. Romans chapter 12 says, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. May we share with the people here and the people outside of here. Because as 1 Corinthians chapter 3 said, every one of us is going to do something different, and it's about doing what God has called us to do, that God will take care of it. So verses 6 through 9 said, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to his own labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. And so each and every one of us is called to do that. Maybe it's our job to plant today. Maybe it's our job to water today. It's not our concern what that is. It's our job to be faithful with what God has given us. It's our job to be faithful with those people that God has put in our lives. We talk about it in youth group all the time. There are people that you interact with that you may be the only person in their life willing and capable of speaking the love of Jesus Christ. We can't assume that somebody else is out there. We can't assume that somebody else will take care of it. And we do that in so many different ways. Sometimes we do it ourselves. We do it physically by the words that we speak, the actions that we perform. And sometimes we're not in that position, right? Like right now, Jim's in Cameroon. We're not there. We can pray, absolutely. But there's a reason that we take the collection. There's a reason that money is given. And it's so that we can equip those who are able to be in places that we are not. And so I do pray that now, 5 weeks out, that you are thinking and praying about your ability and what you're going to do when we take up that collection. But I also don't want you to think that that's it. That being mission-minded, being outreach-minded, being mindful of the souls that are around us and their desperate need of Jesus Christ is not limited to a check that gets put in a plate. That's not done so that you don't have to worry about souls for the rest of the year. That's not a one-time, well, I don't have to worry about it now. It is something that equips and supplies needs that are there that we absolutely can meet. But I pray that our thought of the souls around us goes so far beyond what's going to take place on that Contribution Sunday next month. I pray that it affects the way that we look at people. I pray that it affects the way that we have conversations and the way that we interact. You never know when something small grows. You never know when you just planted a seed and all the things that came out of it. You don't know when you did something for one person and it ends up being that person that goes on to water the plant. Because it doesn't matter who gets the glory, right? That was Paul's whole point. The whole point was God's the one that gets the glory. And so we want to be people who are loving each other and reaching out to each other and sharing Jesus with each other so that when we come here on Sunday morning, maybe if God has been doing His job, which He always does, and we have done our job, and those two things come together, then sometimes on Sunday mornings, like last week, we have to move this plant, which is super pretty, by the way, because maybe, just maybe, we'll have reason to need to view that after service, right? That's exciting. And so here in a moment, Michael's going to get up and we're going to sing a song. And I pray that if you have come this morning and your foundation feels cracked and broken, I pray that you don't leave feeling the same way. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid to come forward and say, I could use a little help. That's why we're here. That's why we're here, is to be there for each other, to love one another, support one another. We each have gone through those ups and downs of times that we're close and times that we're not. Don't be afraid and don't be ashamed to say, I'm not in a place of strength today. Let us help you with that. Or maybe you came this morning and you said, today is the day that the foundation gets laid. Today is the day that I say, God, I want to live for you for the rest of my life. And that starts now. Maybe you need prayers because you're hurting physically, you're hurting spiritually. But whatever it is, we pray that if you have a need, that you come this morning as we stand and sing.